The fluorescent lighting of O'Hare's Terminal 3 buzzed low above the crowd, casting a sterile glow over polished shoes, high-end luggage, and practiced expressions. It was just after 7:15 a.m., a frigid Tuesday morning, and yet the terminal buzzed with a kind of mechanical energy, the kind only business travelers and anxious executives knew too well. Gate B11. Alara Air Flight 376 to San Francisco had begun boarding its first-class cabin. Danielle Coleman stepped forward when her group was called, Group 1, with the same quiet confidence she brought into every boardroom she'd ever sat in. A cream wool coat wrapped around her full figure, soft curls tucked beneath a silk scarf, and her flats clicked gently against the tile floor. No rolling carry-on, just a small leather handbag and a slim tablet case tucked under her arm. Efficiency. Precision. Grace. She didn't need to speak, her presence was enough to shift the air at the jet bridge. A tall, stern-faced woman with tightly pinned blonde hair and a wrinkle-free uniform stood beside the door to the plane. Sandra Holbrook. Chief Purser. 30 years with Alara Air and not a single demerit on her record. Her smile was tight, her posture perfect. Danielle handed over her digital boarding pass with a polite nod. Sandra didn't scan it. Instead, her eyes dropped, slowly, to Danielle's chest, then to her stomach, hips, thighs. A full second too long. Then she looked up, offering a smile too dry to be genuine. "I believe you may be in the wrong lane, ma'am," Sandra said sweetly, too loudly. "Economy Plus is just around the corner, past the divider." Danielle blinked, lips parting slightly. "I'm in 1A, she said calmly, extending the boarding pass once more. Sandra made no move to take it. Her smile curdled. "That's a first-class seat." "I know." The line behind Danielle had paused. A middle-aged man in a navy pinstriped suit shifted his weight behind her. A young blonde woman in leggings and an oversized cashmere sweater glanced at Sandra, then at Danielle, then quickly away. Sandra's voice dropped to a sharper, pointed tone. "You're a bit too large for first class, don't you think?" Silence. The kind that sucked the air out of the terminal. Danielle didn't flinch. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, stayed on Sandra. Slowly, she lowered her boarding pass and raised her phone. One press, the camera opened. She zoomed in on the small gold nameplate pinned to Sandra's blouse and tapped to take a picture. Then, without a word, she walked past her and onto the plane. Sandra watched her go, cheeks flushed. Inside the cabin, Danielle moved toward her seat. First class was sleek and minimal, cool blue tones, leather seats with adjustable privacy panels, and the faint scent of citrus-scented disinfectant. Seat 1A waited, aisle left, front row, nearest the cockpit. She sat, settled her bag beneath the seat, crossed her ankles. From a few rows behind, Rachel Lynn, a junior flight attendant barely 6 months into her role, watched the entire exchange unfold. She was 24, short, sharp-eyed, with a nervous energy that clung to her like perfume. Her skin was pale, her dark ponytail taut against her head. She hadn't said a word, but her jaw ached from holding back. Sandra entered the cabin moments later, readjusting her blouse as if to smooth away what had happened. She paused by Danielle's seat, feigning a tone of apology. "Miss Coleman, was it?" she asked, glancing at the screen in front of the seat. Danielle didn't answer. "Apologize if my words came off as misinformed. I just wanted to ensure that our seating arrangements were correct. We've had some issues with seat confusion lately." Rachel winced. "That wasn't true." "Not at all." Danielle turned her head slowly, looking up at her. Her voice was velvet. "Are you suggesting I don't know how to read my own boarding pass?" Sandra's smile twitched. No. Just a misunderstanding. We get surprised sometimes." Danielle tilted her head slightly, like she was examining a specimen. "Surprised by what?" exactly? There it was, the trap snapping shut. Sandra didn't answer. Instead, she gave a shallow nod and turned sharply to prepare the pre-flight announcement. Rachel came forward moments later, approaching Danielle quietly with a bottle of water and a fresh towel. "Miss Coleman," she said, voice soft. "Can I offer you anything else? A pillow? Another beverage?" Danielle looked up at her, eyes narrowing but not unkindly. She accepted the water but didn't respond. Rachel lingered a moment longer. "I'm sorry," she added, almost in a whisper. Danielle's eyebrows raised slightly. "Were you the one who spoke to me?" Rachel shook her head. "Then you have nothing to apologize for," Danielle said, her voice still calm but edged with iron. Rachel stepped back, shame prickling beneath her skin. Danielle opened her tablet. Her fingers moved quickly, almost surgically. She tapped into the Allura Air Secure Wi-Fi, one encrypted app, one contact, General Counsel, Allura Air. Her message was brief: Flight 376. Incident in boarding. Please advise next steps. Initiating silent protocol. She slipped the device into sleep mode and leaned back. Meanwhile, in the galley, Sandra adjusted her lipstick in the reflection of the microwave door. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "First class used to mean something." Rachel, standing beside her, stared straight ahead. "She's calm," Sandra went on. "Too calm. Probably trying to make a scene for TikTok or something." "She didn't record anything," Rachel said quietly. Sandra scoffed. "Of course she didn't. People like that don't need proof. Just a sob story and the right hashtags." Rachel turned. "What do you mean, people like that?" Sandra paused, then smiled, slow and cold. "People who don't belong. Who try to squeeze into places made for someone else. And then act shocked when it doesn't fit." Rachel opened her mouth. Closed it. Her heart pounded. She saw Elaine, her sister, sitting on a cold airport bench 3 years ago, crying after being asked to deboard for seatbelt safety. She saw the headlines a month later: passenger found dead in apartment days after filing discrimination claim. She swallowed it down. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Back in 1A, Danielle looked out the window. Her reflection in the glass was still composed, but inside, the storm was building. She wasn't here by chance. And Sandra Holbrook had just made the mistake of her career. The plane had leveled out at 34,000 feet, somewhere over Nebraska, slicing through blue sky in the illusion of civility. Danielle sat unmoving, her seat reclined just slightly, legs crossed at the ankles. She had barely touched her sparkling water. The cabin was quiet, the kind of quiet particular to first class, where discomfort was dressed in pressed collars and hushed microaggressions. From the galley, Sandra moved between the aisles with polished precision, offering breakfast menus and fake smiles. She didn't look Danielle's way once. Rachel watched everything from her station. She moved when she had to, offered pastries, poured coffee, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. On Danielle. On Sandra. On a name that had just resurfaced like a tidal wave. Elaine. Her sister had once dreamed of working in the airline industry. She was bubbly, whip-smart, and yes, bigger than the uniforms ever wanted her to be. It didn't matter. Until it did. Until a flight attendant at another airline made her feel like a problem. Until management made her feel invisible. Until the comments weren't just whispered. Until the day she sat at the edge of her bed and never got up again. Rachel closed her eyes briefly and forced her focus back to the cabin. To Danielle. Why had that name, Danielle Coleman, lit something up in her memory? Why did it scratch at the back of her mind like a half-finished thought? She returned to the galley, pulled out her phone under the counter, and searched quietly, Danielle Coleman Allura Air. The first result was a press release. Danielle Coleman, Senior Strategic Advisor, Alara Air Holdings. The second, a legal op-ed, published 2 years ago, penned by Danielle about anti-discrimination policies in commercial aviation. And the third, an archived article titled, "She Spoke When No One Else Would, Airline Exec Defends Passenger After Public Incident." Rachel's breath hitched. There was a photo. Danielle, in a dark blazer, standing at a podium. And next to her, Elaine. Her sister. That same tired, grateful smile Elaine had worn after winning her settlement. Danielle had been her advocate. Her voice. Her protector. And she had no idea. "Everything okay, Rachel?" Sandra's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Rachel jumped, quickly locking her phone. "Yes," she said. "Sorry. Just, hydration run." Sandra raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Back in her seat, Danielle adjusted the blanket over her lap and opened the tablet again. Messages from legal were coming in. "Reviewed your report. You're clear to proceed. Captain informed. Observe and document only, for now." She glanced across the aisle at the older gentleman in 1C. He'd stared openly at her when she boarded but hadn't spoken since. Further back, the couple in 2A and 2B were pretending to sleep. No one had intervened earlier. No one ever did. People didn't like disrupting the comfortable rhythm of superiority. Danielle's calm was intentional. She had learned long ago that being loud got her labeled. That her tears would not be held gently. So she wielded silence like a weapon, and influence like a scalpel. She noticed Rachel hovering 2 rows back, fidgeting. "Rachel," Danielle said softly when she passed again. The young woman froze. "Yes, ma'am." Danielle looked up with that same unreadable gaze. "You've been unsettled all morning." Rachel swallowed. "I'm okay." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "That wasn't a question." Rachel stared down at the carpeted aisle, her throat tightening. "Did you mean to sit in 1A?" she blurted, then instantly regretted the phrasing. Danielle blinked slowly. "I don't accidentally spend $2,000 on a seat. I didn't mean, no." Rachel shifted, suddenly overwhelmed with heat. I saw something online. I didn't know. About a few years ago. You spoke at a hearing." Danielle didn't react. "It was my sister," Rachel said quietly. "Elaine Lynn. That case, that was her. You spoke for her when no one else did. And I didn't even realize." Danielle's posture shifted just slightly. A pause. A softer breath. "You're Elaine's sister?" Rachel nodded, unable to speak. Danielle's gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. "I remember her. She was brave. She didn't feel that way. Not at the end. She was," Danielle said firmly. "Even if it cost her everything." Rachel pressed her lips together. Her eyes burned. "I should have said something today. When she spoke to you like that. I just stood there. I hate that I didn't do anything." Danielle leaned in slightly. "You think speaking up would have made you feel better?" Rachel flinched. "No. I think it would have been right." That landed. Danielle nodded slowly. "Sometimes silence is safer." "I know that. But safe doesn't mean right." "I've spent years hating myself for being quiet," Rachel said, the words spilling faster. "I told Elaine to file the complaint. To fight back. To stand up for herself. And when it got worse, when they ignored her, I told her to hang on, that it would get better. But it didn't." Danielle's eyes never left hers. "What happened to your sister wasn't your fault. But what I do now is." That hung in the air between them, heavy, true. From the front of the cabin, Sandra approached again, a forced smile plastered across her face. "Ladies, is everything all right here?" Danielle straightened in her seat. "Quite," she said. "Rachel was just telling me about her sister, a former passenger who was mistreated by another airline. You remember Elaine Lynn, don't you?" Sandra's face twitched. "I can't say I do." "Of course not," Danielle replied coolly. "But I do. And apparently, so does the board of directors. Her case led to major reform proposals. You should look it up." Sandra's eyes flicked to Rachel, who refused to look away now. Danielle smiled, small, cold. "Don't worry. We're just reminiscing." Sandra's cheeks pinked. "If there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable." "There is," Danielle cut in. "You can stop assuming things about people who don't look like your idea of first class." Sandra opened her mouth. Closed it. "I'll be in the galley," she muttered, then turned on her heel. Danielle looked back to Rachel. "This flight is being documented by legal." Quietly. "What you said, what you're doing right now, it matters more than you know." Rachel exhaled slowly. "What happens when we land?" Danielle leaned back in her seat. "We find out who still has a seat at the table, and who doesn't." Rachel nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Not just grief now, but purpose. And somewhere in the clouds above America, for the first time in a long while, something began to shift. San Francisco shimmered in the distance beneath a film of marine haze. Flight 376 had begun its final descent. Seatbelt signs lit up with a soft chime. The mood in first class was quiet. Too quiet. No idle conversation. No polite laughter. Just the subdued clink of silverware being cleared and the slow exhale of tension long held. Danielle sat still in 1A, tablet tucked away, lips pressed in a line. She had written everything, every detail, time-stamped, categorized. Not just the words Sandra had used, but the silences that followed. The passengers who averted their eyes. The ones who smirked. The ones who said nothing. Documentation, yes. But more than that, a mirror. Sandra, in contrast, had returned to her default mode, authoritative, efficient, pretending nothing had happened. That was her armor. And she wore it well. But Rachel wasn't pretending anymore. She moved through the cabin differently now. Not faster. Not louder. Just firmer. Present. And when her eyes met Danielle's, there was no fear, only quiet recognition. When the wheels touched down, the silence was replaced by soft murmurs. The unbuckling of belts. The rustling of coats. Sandra walked down the aisle and stood by the forward door as if nothing were wrong, smoothing her hair and adjusting her badge. "Welcome to San Francisco," she said into the intercom. "Local time is 9:42 a.m. We hope you've had a pleasant flight with Alara Air. It's been our privilege to serve you." Danielle stood, adjusted her coat, and turned slowly toward the front. Sandra moved aside for her to pass. But Danielle didn't. She paused, just short of the door, glanced back at Rachel. "Walk with me," she said. Rachel froze. Then nodded. She followed. They stepped onto the jet bridge. The air here was cooler, sharper, a shift from the canned calm of the cabin. The light was different too, real, brutal in its honesty. And then they saw him. Charles Coleman stood at the end of the walkway, hands folded behind his back. Tailored overcoat pressed to perfection, his salt and pepper beard gave him the air of quiet command, a man who'd seen storms and walked out dry. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. But when Danielle reached him, he opened his arms. She stepped into them, wordless. The moment was electric. Passengers filtered out behind them, slowing as they registered what was happening. Phones lifted. Some whispers rose. Wait, is that? That's Charles Coleman. That woman from 1A, she's. Sandra exited last, her stride confident, until her eyes landed on Charles. Her face froze mid-expression. A half-smile turned to stunned disbelief. Mr. Coleman, she said quickly, stepping forward. We weren't expecting. You judged my daughter by her size, he said without looking at her. The words hit like a slap. Sandra stopped moving. Danielle stepped back, her hand still on her father's arm. Charles turned toward Sandra, slow and deliberate. By her skin. Not by her seat. Not by her name. That's not how we fly. Rachel stood to the side, hands clenched at her sides, her chest tightening with every word. Sandra's voice cracked. I didn't know who she was. That's the problem, Charles replied. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect. And yet, here we are. Her eyes darted to the pilots, to Rachel, to the passengers beginning to gather, hovering just within earshot. I was just trying to uphold first-class standards. Then your standards are broken. Danielle turned toward her, expression unreadable. What you did wasn't just offensive. It was humiliating, loud, public, and deliberate. You didn't question my boarding pass. You questioned me. Sandra's voice wavered. I didn't mean it like that. You did, Danielle replied. And that's exactly why we're here. Charles nodded at a tall man standing near the terminal gate, a VP of operations, clipboard in hand. The man stepped forward. Ms. Holbrook, he said quietly, we've received reports, corroborated by crew and cabin observations. You're being placed on immediate administrative leave pending formal review. Your badge and access credentials, please. Sandra's mouth opened. You can't be serious. I've worked for this company for over 30 years. Danielle's voice was calm. And in 30 seconds, you undid every ounce of credibility you built. Sandra turned to Rachel, now desperate. You saw how she came in, how she acted. You can't seriously. Rachel's voice was steady. I saw how you acted. And I saw my sister in her face. Sandra blinked. What? Rachel stepped forward. Her name was Elaine Lynn. She was a passenger once too. A little too curvy for a seatbelt extender. Not polished enough for first class. Someone humiliated her in front of strangers. That woman over there, she nodded to Danielle, fought for her when no one else did. And now she's fighting for every other person you made feel small. Sandra took a step back. This isn't fair. No, Danielle said. It's overdue. With a trembling hand, Sandra unclipped her badge and passed it to the VP. She didn't look at anyone as she walked away. Just kept moving past the whispers and the phones and the eyes. Rachel exhaled, her knees weak. Charles turned to her. What's your name? Rachel Lynn. You spoke with integrity today, Miss Lynn. She nodded, swallowing emotion. We need more people like you in leadership, Charles added. Rachel looked stunned. Me? Danielle smiled, finally. You. Behind them, reporters were gathering. Someone had leaked the story. Charles looked at his daughter. Up to you, he said. Danielle took a deep breath, straightened her coat, and walked forward toward the press. Ms. Coleman, is it true you were discriminated against by your own company? She paused, looked straight into the nearest camera. I was mistaken for someone who didn't belong. Again. And that's exactly why I'm speaking now. Flashes burst. The crowd leaned closer. I travel often. Quietly. Without entourage or title. And this morning, I was told I was too large for first class. That I didn't look like I should be here. And it wasn't the first time. But it will be the last time I let it go unanswered. Are you filing a lawsuit? No, she said. I'm changing policy. Why speak out now? Danielle looked past the crowd, toward Rachel. Because silence doesn't protect you. And when you're always asked to shrink, to squeeze into the comfort of others, eventually, you forget your own shape. Today, I remembered mine. A hush fell. One that felt less like discomfort and more like understanding. And then, quietly, the sound of clapping. From a gate agent. Then a pilot. Then Rachel. Danielle didn't bow. Didn't cry. She simply nodded. And walked on. By the time Danielle reached baggage claim, her face had already appeared on 3 major news networks. Clips from the press encounter at the gate were circulating online, cut into sound bites. Her voice calm. Her eyes steady. You judged my daughter by her size. That's not how we fly. Eventually, you forget your own shape. Today, I remembered mine. Twitter was ablaze. Some hashtags praised her. Others mocked her. Most fell somewhere in between, trying to figure out who Danielle Coleman really was. To some, she was a symbol. To others, an insider playing victim. To Danielle herself, she was simply tired. Rachel stayed by her side longer than expected. At first, just to walk through the airport. Then, to talk. They sat in a quiet waiting area near the executive car pickup zone. Danielle had declined the company SUV. She wanted time to think, a pause between the end of one flight and the turbulence ahead. Rachel sat on the bench beside her, hands curled around a paper cup of coffee. I'm sorry, she said again. Not just for this morning. For not seeing it sooner. For not saying something sooner. Danielle shook her head slowly. You don't owe me an apology, Rachel. You owe yourself permission. Rachel blinked. Permission? To take up space. To speak. To exist in full volume, not whispers. Your sister deserved that. So do you. Rachel looked down. Elaine was the strong one. She was the brave one, Danielle corrected. And that doesn't mean you weren't. Sometimes surviving in silence is its own kind of courage. The silence between them settled, not awkward, just full. Do you ever get used to being looked at like that? Rachel asked. Danielle gave a soft laugh. Not really. I've just learned to care less. Their discomfort isn't mine to fix. Rachel stared into her coffee. What happens to Sandra now? Danielle's tone didn't change. She'll go through a review process. There are procedures. But it's out of my hands. Do you want her fired? Danielle paused. No, she said. I want her to understand. Firing doesn't fix people, it just moves the rot somewhere else. But I do want her to know what it feels like when her choices cost her something real. Not just a slap on the wrist. Rachel nodded slowly. I don't know if I could be that measured. I'm not always, Danielle admitted. But rage is loud. It burns fast, and burns out. I prefer staying useful. Rachel smiled for the first time. That explains the way you destroyed her with a sentence. Danielle chuckled. Wasn't personal. Just honest. Her phone buzzed, another notification. Another network asking for an interview. She silenced it. Just then, Charles approached from the escalator. His overcoat now folded over his arm, tie slightly loosened, a rarity for him. He didn't say anything right away. Just gave Danielle a look, the kind that carried history. You were good out there, he said. I didn't plan to be. I know. He turned to Rachel. And you? She straightened. Sir. You planning to stay with Alara Air? I wasn't sure. But now, I think I have something worth staying for. Charles nodded. We need more truth-tellers in our ranks. Rachel glanced at Danielle. I think I'd like to learn from the best. Danielle smiled. Then you'd better be ready to be very unpopular. Rachel smiled back. That, I can do. The days that followed were both surreal and relentlessly ordinary. Danielle returned to work, though now, the world watched her every step. She declined most interviews but released one statement through the company's official channels. One that emphasized reform, not vengeance. She insisted on the immediate implementation of bias and empathy training for all crew and ground staff. And announced the creation of a Passenger Equity Council, a body with real teeth. Rachel was personally invited to apply for Alara Air's internal leadership track. She hesitated, then said yes. One afternoon, she found herself in the training center. Reviewing footage from other flights, recordings submitted anonymously by passengers. Some were subtle. Others, brutal. All of them left her shaken. She stayed late that night, long after others had gone. Danielle passed by the conference room and saw her inside. She knocked lightly. You all right? Rachel looked up, eyes red. This happened so much more than I thought. Danielle nodded. It's not new. We're just finally paying attention. Rachel stood up. It's like I've spent years looking away. You were surviving. That's not nothing. Rachel looked at the screen again. How do you stay steady? I remind myself I'm not crazy, Danielle said. That what I feel is real. That silence doesn't mean agreement. That when someone tells me I'm too much, it usually means I've made them uncomfortable. And that's their work, not mine. Rachel nodded, absorbing it. Also, Danielle added, with a sly smile, good wine. Rachel laughed, louder than she had in weeks. A few days later, Sandra Holbrook sat in a windowless HR conference room. Flanked by two corporate investigators and a lawyer. She was offered the chance to speak. She declined. She offered a statement. It was defensive. Cold. She never asked about the woman from Seat 1A. Never mentioned her name. And in the end, the company made their decision. The position of chief purser was vacated. Meanwhile, the next time Danielle flew, a week later, same airline, different crew. The experience was seamless. No stares. No questioning glances. And when she took her seat in 1A again, a small card waited on the tray. Handwritten. Just 2 sentences. You belong here. Always have. Rachel. Danielle smiled and placed the card in her bag without a word. The sky outside was golden, washed in evening light. The kind of sky that didn't apologize for being too much. Too wide. Too soft. Too loud. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and finally exhaled. 3 weeks later, the new Alara Air Passenger Equity Council held its first closed-door meeting. The room was modest, no glitz, no cameras. Just a table. A whiteboard. A pot of lukewarm coffee. And 7 people who had seen the inside of injustice too many times to sugarcoat it. Danielle sat at the head of the table. No title card. No fanfare. She didn't want to preside. She wanted to listen. Rachel sat 2 seats down, notebook open, her Alara Air leadership trainee badge clipped to a blazer she hadn't worn since her final interview. She'd come prepared, but more than that, she came present. As each member shared a story, a passenger in a wheelchair left without assistance, a mother with an autistic child treated like a disturbance, an elderly man reprimanded for speaking broken English, Danielle listened without interrupting. They weren't statistics, they were voices, and that was the work now, hearing what had long been silenced. At the end of the session, Danielle looked around the table. "No matter what your title is," she said, "you have permission to name the things that hurt. That's the only way we build something that lasts. This room exists because someone didn't stay quiet. Let's honor that with every policy we rewrite." They nodded, not like subordinates, like co-conspirators. Later that evening, Danielle walked alone through the glass corridor of Alara Air's headquarters, the one that overlooked the airfield. Dozens of planes dotted the tarmac, lined up like chess pieces waiting for direction. Charles found her there, hands in his coat pockets. He stopped beside her but didn't speak right away. "They're going to offer you my job," he finally said. She turned to him, surprised. "They told you that?" He smiled faintly. "I told them that." Danielle looked away, heart suddenly heavier than she expected. "I didn't do this for that," she said. "This wasn't a power play." "I know," he replied. "That's why you're the right choice." She took a long breath. "They'll say it's nepotism, that I got here on your name." He tilted his head. "Let them. Then show them your work." She laughed once, quiet, then met his eyes. "You built this company and you rebuilt its conscience," he said. "That matters more now." She said nothing, just nodded. The following weekend, Rachel stood in front of a modest gray headstone beneath a quiet tree in Berkeley. She didn't speak at first, just placed a bouquet of bright sunflowers at the base and sat cross-legged in the grass beside it. "Hey Lainey," she murmured. "Something happened. A lot of things, actually." Her voice cracked, but she smiled. "There was a woman on a flight who looked like no one else in first class, and someone tried to make her feel small, but she didn't shrink. She stood up, and it made me remember all the ways you stood up, even when it cost you." She brushed a leaf from the engraved letters. "I didn't get to save you, but I think I found someone who saved both of us." She sat there for a long time. No phone, no music, just the sound of wind and memory. And for once, her silence didn't feel like failure, it felt like grace. 6 months later, Alara's in-flight training program featured a new module, Passenger Empathy and Equity. Rachel's voice narrated part of the training, Danielle's policies underpinned it. But the face on the title screen belonged to neither. It was Elaine Lynn, laughing in a still photograph, unpolished, joyful, unapologetic. A note scrolled beneath, in memory of those who were made to feel too much and chose not to disappear. New hires would watch it on their first day, veterans would be required to review it annually. Not everyone liked it, but no one could say they hadn't been told. That fall, Danielle took her first vacation in years, not a work trip disguised as rest, not a wellness retreat with hidden Wi-Fi, a real break. She flew commercial, still Alara Air, not for the miles, but for the principle. At the gate, a new flight attendant approached her quietly. "Miss Coleman," she said, "sorry, I don't want to bother you. I just wanted to say thank you." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For making me feel like I belong here. I never thought someone who looked like me could be in this uniform." Danielle smiled, warm and full. "You absolutely belong." The young woman nodded. "Have a great flight." Danielle walked down the jet bridge, not needing to be anyone but herself. No one looked at her twice, no one questioned her seat. And when she settled into 1A, she exhaled, not because she'd proven herself, but because she no longer had to. The story never made the evening news again, it faded as stories do, replaced by fresher outrage, newer scandals. But somewhere in the engine of an airline, something shifted, not overnight, not everywhere, but enough. Enough that one day, someone else in a cream wool coat and comfortable shoes would walk onto a plane and be treated like she mattered, not in spite of how she looked, but because people finally understood that dignity isn't distributed by seat class, it's earned by how you choose to see someone and how you choose not to look.